The Ice of Eternity. The Legend of Milano Cortina 2026. In the high, jagged peaks of the Dolomites, there is a saying, "The mountain does not forget, but it remembers." For 70 years, the village of Cortina d'Ampezzo whispered stories of the 1956 games, of wooden skis, frozen mustaches, and the first time a woman took the Olympic oath. But in February 2026, the world didn't just come back to the mountains. The world witnessed a collision of two Italies. One was the Italy of Da Vinci and ancient stone. The other was the Italy of high-speed fiber optics and sustainable steel. This is the story of the most complex winter games ever attempted, a journey from the fashion runways of Milan to the thin, lethal air of the Alps. Chapter 1. The Two Faces of Italy. The Olympic Winter Games Milano Cortina 2026 were born from a radical idea. Usually, an Olympics is a city's jewel, but Italy, in its infinite wisdom and flair for the dramatic, decided the Games should belong to an entire region. It was a sprawling map that stretched from the sophisticated urban sprawl of Milan to the legendary slopes of the Valtellina and the Dolomite peaks of Cortina. In Milan, the air was electric. This was the city of Prada, Armani, and the Duomo. The opening ceremony at the San Siro Stadium wasn't just a show, it was a fashion statement directed to the gods. As the American delegation marched in, decked out in high-tech Ralph Lauren gear designed to withstand the biting Lombardy wind, the roar of 80,000 fans shook the foundations of the city. But 250 miles away, the vibe was different. In Cortina, the queen of the Dolomites, the mountains stood like silent giants, watching the modern world invade their sanctuary. The contrast was the heart of the 2026 story, the speed of the city versus the endurance of the stone. Chapter 2. The American Revenge on Ice. For the USA, the 2026 Games were a matter of national pride. After a decade of rebuilding their winter programs, the Americans arrived in Italy with a squad of Gen Z gladiators. The spotlight fell on a 19-year-old figure skater from Vermont named Leo Sterling. Leo didn't just skate, he defied physics. In the Mediolanum Forum in Milan, under the glare of 1,000 cameras, Leo attempted something the world deemed impossible, a quintuple salchow. As the music, a haunting remix of an old Italian opera, reached its crescendo, Leo took flight. For a second, he seemed to hover in the air, a spinning blur of blue and silver. When his blade hit the ice with a sharp clack, the silence in the arena was deafening. Then the score appeared on the Jumbotron, a world record. The Vermont Iceman had claimed the first gold of the Games, setting a tone of American dominance that would echo through the coming weeks. Chapter 3. The Ghosts of the Stelvio. While Milan celebrated the grace of skating, the true gladiators of the snow were heading to Bormio. The Stelvio Pass is one of the most feared downhill courses in the world. It is icy, dark, and unforgiving. Among the competitors was a veteran American downhill racer, Sarah Chen. At 31, she was considered old for the sport. She had survived 3 knee surgeries and a devastating crash in Beijing. But Sarah had a secret weapon. She had spent the last 2 years training in a wind tunnel in North Carolina, perfecting a tuck that made her as aerodynamic as a fighter jet. On the morning of the downhill final, the Stelvio was shrouded in a blue ice glaze. It was so slick that even walking on it was dangerous. Sarah pushed off the starting gate, and within 5 seconds, she was hitting 85 miles per hour. The cameras could barely track her. She navigated the Carcentina turn with inches to spare.
When she crossed the finish line, she didn't just win gold, she beat the silver medalist by a staggering 1.2 seconds, an eternity in downhill skiing. She collapsed into the snow, weeping. The mountains had remembered her struggle, and today they had let her fly. Chapter 4: The Rise of Ski Mountaineering. The 2026 Games introduced a new discipline that captured the imagination of the American public: ski mountaineering, or skimo. This wasn't just skiing, it was survival. Athletes had to climb the mountain on skis with skins attached to the bottom, then rip them off and race down the other side. The skimo events took place in the heart of the Dolomites. The scenery was so beautiful it looked like a CGI movie. But the reality was brutal. Oxygen was scarce, muscles screamed. A young American duo from Colorado, brothers Jax and Silas Miller, became the darlings of NBC's primetime coverage. They were former endurance runners who had pivoted to the snow. In the relay final, Jax suffered a broken pole halfway up the ascent. In a display of true Olympic spirit, an Italian competitor who had already finished his leg handed Jax his own pole. Jax rallied, passing the Swiss and French teams in a frantic downhill dash to secure a bronze medal for Team USA. It was a moment of sportsmanship that went viral, reminding the world that even in the heat of battle, there is a shared humanity in the cold. Chapter 5: The Sustainability Revolution. One of the most astonishing aspects of Milano Cortina 2026 was the invisible infrastructure. Italy had promised the most sustainable games in history. Instead of building massive concrete stadiums that would sit empty after the games, they used temporary 3D printed structures. The Olympic Village in Milan was built using timber from the very forests in the Dolomites that had been leveled by a massive storm years prior. It was a circular economy, the mountain giving to the city and the city honoring the mountain. American engineers and tech giants from Silicon Valley were heavily involved. They provided the digital twin technology that allowed organizers to simulate the movement of millions of fans, ensuring that public transport was never overwhelmed. For the first time, an Olympics had a zero-waste footprint. The electricity for the ice rinks came from alpine hydroelectric dams, and the medals themselves were made from recycled electronic waste. Chapter 6: The Night of the Wolves. The most USA-centric drama unfolded on the hockey rink. In a stunning upset, the American women's ice hockey team found themselves facing the perennial powerhouse, Canada, in the semifinals. The game went into 3 overtimes. It was 2 a.m. in Italy, but back in New York and Los Angeles, millions were glued to their screens. The fatigue was visible. Players were leaning on their sticks, gasping for air. Finally, American captain Chloe the Wolf intercepted a pass at mid-ice. She broke away, her skates cutting deep grooves into the Milanese ice. With a flick of her wrist, she sent the puck into the top corner of the net. The bench cleared. The miracle in Milan was complete. The USA went on to defeat Finland in the final, reclaiming the gold they had craved for years. Chapter 7: The Closing of the Circle. As the games drew to a close, the focus shifted back to Cortina for the closing ceremony. The sun began to set behind the Tofane Mountains, painting the peaks in shades of pink and orange, a phenomenon the locals call enrosadira. The torch was extinguished, but the legacy of Milano Cortina 2026 was just beginning. It had been a games of firsts, the first truly regional games, the first to use AI to judge snowboarding runs for perfect accuracy, the first to see an American win gold in 5 different sporting categories. But more than the medals, it was the feeling of the event. Italy had opened its heart. The USA had brought its fire. Together, they had proven that even in an age of digital isolation, there is nothing quite like the raw physical reality of the Winter Olympics. As the athletes boarded the high-speed trains back to the airports, they looked out at the Dolomites one last time. The stone giants were silent again. The snow would melt, the temporary stadiums would be disassembled, and the world would move on to the next host. But for 16 days in 2026, the ice of Italy was the center of the universe. And as the American flag was raised for the final time, the spirit of the Iron Star, the symbol of resilience, stayed behind in the mountains of Cortina, a gift from the New World to the Old. Chapter 8. The Silent Velocity of the Anthals Valley. Far from the hustle and bustle of Milan lies the Anthals Valley near the Austrian border. Biathlon, one of the toughest events in the Winter Olympics, was held here. A 24-year-old Nevada girl, Aria Forrest, was America's hope in this battle of perfect rifle marksmanship combined with sheer physical prowess in skiing. Aria was no ordinary athlete. He was a former U.S. Navy marksman. His lungs were as hard as iron. The height of Anthals was 1,600 meters above sea level. Where breathing in thin air is difficult, Aria had to aim for a steady target after skiing 5 kilometers with her heart rate down. A snowstorm started on the day of the finals. Visibility was near zero. Favorite athletes from Norway and Germany were missing one after another. But when Aria picked up the rifle, the American audience saw a strange sight. He was as steady as a rock in the midst of the storm. Every shot hit the target. When he reached the finish line, his body was covered in snow, but in his hands was the first gold medal in biathlon history for America. The NBC commentator was shouting, "She didn't just beat the clock, she tamed the storm." Chapter 9. The Colosseum of Snow. Cortina's bobsled rebirth. Cortina d'Ampezzo, the city returned to the main stage of the Olympics after 1956. This time, the attraction here was the newly renovated Eugenio Monti track. It is one of the fastest and most dangerous bobsled tracks in the world. It was a personal battle for Team USA. They missed out on a medal by just a few milliseconds in Beijing 4 years ago. This time, their pilot was a former Texas football player, Marcus Jordan. Marcus knew he would have to fight to the death to win this track. As the bobsled hurtled down the hill at 130 kilometers per hour, the camera could only see a blur of white and blue. The G-force at every turn was crushing the athletes' bodies. Marcus's sled almost flipped over on the last bend, but he kept control with the strength of his muscular arms. When they crossed the finish line, the time difference was just 0.01 seconds. For the USA, this gold medal was a triumph of courage. Chapter 10. The Artificial Intelligence Revolution. The 2026 Olympics will be remembered not only for the games, but also for the technology. AI judging technology was used for the first time in Milan's ice rinks. In events like figure skating and snowboarding, where human judgment was accused of bias, AI was analyzing every movement with millimeter precision. As American snowboard legend Chloe Kim delivered the best ride of her last Olympic career, the AI screen displayed her height, rotation speed, and landing balance in real-time graphics. Viewers could sit at home and watch how science meets art. When Chloe Kim won her 3rd gold medal, it was not just an athlete's triumph, but a technologically recognized excellence.
Chapter 11. The Night of the Lombardian Lights. Italians are a festive nation. Medals were awarded to the winners each night in Milan's Piazza del Duomo courtyard. The scene was magical. The future of 2026 was projected with a laser show on 14th century architecture. The most emotional moment for American audiences was when 39-year-old legendary skier Michaela Schifrin was accepting the last Olympic medal of her career. The Italian fans gave him a standing ovation. It was a unique example of sportsmanship. When Schifrin took the microphone and said in Italian, "Grazie, Italia, for giving me my final dream," the entire city of Milan was in tears. Chapter 12. The Logistics Miracle. Milan to Cortina in 90 minutes. Many feared that the distance from Milan to Cortina would derail the Olympics, but Italian engineers developed the Olympic Express, a special hydrogen-powered high-speed train. American tourists marveled at how they went from skating in Milan in the morning to skiing in the snow-white hills of Cortina in the afternoon. Outside the train window, Italian villages were visible, with vineyards and ancient churches covered in snow. It was not just going from one place to another, it was a journey through Italy's history and future. Chapter 13. The Legacy Beyond the Ice. February 23, 2026. The closing ceremony is about to begin at the San Siro Stadium in Milan. The young Adia Forrest led the American team with the flag. At the end of the games, the USA topped the medal list. But even greater than this victory was the hospitality of Italy. The zero plastic policy and use of renewable energy at every venue of the Games gave a new message to the world. When the Italian Prime Minister and the IOC President announced, "This was the Games of the people," fireworks lit up the stadium sky. Chapter 14. The Pulse of the Piazza. While the mountains offered solitude and sacrifice, Milan offered the roar of the future. The Mediolanum Forum became the beating heart of the American skating resurgence. It wasn't just about the jumps, it was about the storytelling. The American duo, Maya and Julian Vance, siblings from Chicago, stepped onto the ice for the ice dance finals. The atmosphere was stiflingly tense. The French and Russian teams had set impossible scores. The Vances chose a risky avant-garde routine, a tribute to the Italian Renaissance, set to a techno-orchestral fusion. They moved like a single shadow. Julian's strength and Maya's ethereal grace created a visual poetry that transcended sport. When the final scores flashed, shattering the world record, the Piazza del Duomo, where thousands of fans watched on giant screens, erupted. It was a red, white, and blue takeover in the fashion capital of the world. For the first time in history, the U.S. swept the podium in 3 different skating disciplines, a feat that had U.S. sports commentators calling it the Milanese massacre of the record books. Chapter 16. The Iron Lung of Valtellina. 3 hours north of Milan lies the Valtellina Valley, a place of steep vineyards and ancient stone walls. This was the theater for cross-country skiing. Unlike the short bursts of alpine skiing, this was the Iron Lung territory, miles of grueling uphill climbs. Enter Caleb the Engine O'Shea, a 26-year-old from Alaska. Caleb was a man of few words and terrifying endurance. In the 50-kilometer mass start, the most brutal event of the Games, the temperature plummeted to minus 15 degrees Celsius, 5 degrees Fahrenheit. A sudden ice crust formed on the track, turning the snow into sandpaper. At the 40-kilometer mark, Caleb was in 5th place, his face crusted in frozen sweat, his lungs burning with the icy air. The leaders, 2 Swedes and a Finn, began their sprint. But Caleb had spent his summers running up the side of Alaskan mountains with a 50-pound pack. He didn't sprint, he simply didn't slow down. He picked them off one by one. In the final stretch, with his vision blurring, Caleb crossed the line and collapsed into the arms of his coaches. He had won the first U.S. gold in the 50 kilometers since 1976. The image of his frosted beard and the American flag draped over his shaking shoulders became the iconic photograph of the 2026 Games. Chapter 17. The Silicon Alps, tech at the tipped edge. For the American audience watching their 8K VR headsets at home, the Milan Cortina Games felt like stepping into a sci-fi movie. This was the smartest Olympics ever staged. U.S. tech giants collaborated with Italian engineers to debut Ghost Runner AR technology. Fans could point their phones at a downhill slope and see a digital overlay of the current leader's run ghosted over the live athlete. You could see exactly where a skier lost half a second or where they gained a millisecond of speed. In the mixed team aerials, the tech was even more vital. Sensors embedded in the athletes' suits measured air pressure and rotation speed, feeding data to the judges instantly. When the U.S. aerials team took gold, the data proved they had achieved a rotation speed previously thought to be physically impossible for a human being without losing consciousness. The Iron Star was now backed by silicon and steel. Chapter 17. The Whisper of the Ancients. As the final week approached, a strange phenomenon occurred. A warm wind, the Föhn, blew across the Alps. It threatened the stability of the snow. The organizers were in a panic.
This was the moment where these sustainable games faced their ultimate test. Instead of trucking in snow, a carbon-heavy process, Italy activated a network of solar-powered snow factories that created snow at temperatures up to 15 degrees Celsius, 59 degrees Fahrenheit. The American sustainability team, working alongside the Italians, managed to keep the slopes of Bormio and Cortina in pristine condition. It was a triumph of human ingenuity over a changing climate, a message that resonated deeply with the younger generation of viewers in the States. Chapter 18. The Last Torch at San Siro. February 22, 2026. The closing ceremony. The San Siro Stadium was a cathedral of light. The athletes entered not by country, but as one giant mass of humanity, a tradition that never fails to move the soul. The Italian tenor, Andrea Bocelli, stood in the center of the pitch, his voice soaring into the Milanese night. The U.S. delegation was the largest and most successful in decades. They had won 15 golds, a testament to a new era of American winter sport. But as the Olympic flame began to dim, the focus wasn't on the tally, it was on the connection. A giant hologram appeared above the stadium, a bridge of light connecting the Duomo of Milan to the peaks of Cortina. It symbolized the 2026 motto, Dreaming Together. As the flag was handed over to the hosts of the 2020 Games, a lone American bugler played a tribute to the fallen athletes of the past, their names projected onto the snow-white floor of the stadium.